Hi, I'm Caris Horsell. I am your host of Parent Unplugged. I am a mother of three and an avid reader, having read over 300 books of areas relating to parenting and all things related. I have an Instagram account which I would love for you to follow at Parent Unplugged. Please look us up. My aim is to provide you with great conversations from parenting experts of all different areas to help you along your parenting journey. I'm really excited to introduce the next guest, Emily from Fox and the Moon. We go through some really interesting topics on sleep, covering colic, reflux, tongue-tie and short naps. I really hope you enjoy this episode. Please don't forget to subscribe or follow, as it really helps to support the channel and helps you know when the next episode lands. Hi, Emily. So you are from Fox and the Moon, and I would just like to start with you telling our listeners today a little bit about who you are and what you do so they can get to know you before we start our conversation.
Okay, so I'm a qualified holistic infant sleep coach, and I also am a qualified infant feeding specialist, so help children with reflux and those types of things. My kind of area of expertise is kind of oral function, mouth breathing, how that can affect sleep, and things like reflux as well. And I am a mother of 2 boys.
Excellent. Well, I'm very excited for this conversation because I feel like sleep is just such a big one for everyone with children. We all need more of it, and it's just a bit of a challenge for us all, isn't it? So can you explain to me a little bit more about the holistic sleep approach that you take at Fox and the Moon and why that's important?
Yeah, so obviously the sleep industry is very saturated, and it's an unregulated industry. I think that's really important to note. What we do at Fox and the Moon, and what all holistic sleep coaches should be doing, is looking at the whole picture. So we're not just looking at sleep patterns, we're looking at things like how that child was born, whether they have history of feeding difficulties, checking the way they're feeding, things like their diet and nutrition, vitamin and nutrient levels, even the way they're breathing overnight. So it's almost seeing sleep as the symptom, and what can we learn from that child's sleep pattern? So analysing diaries very thoroughly, alongside things like food diaries and even bowel movement diaries. So we're very, very thorough. Yeah. Even sometimes when it might not be needed. Because of course parents will come to us with, you kind of early rising, or, they're struggling to get their little ones to go to bed, but once they are, they're fine. Yeah. But we're still very thorough in kind of assessing at the beginning so that we know what approach to take with those children, and essentially not using any behavioural techniques. So no leaving the child to cry or changing the way a parent is responding to their child.
Okay. Because, we used to hear a lot about this, didn't we, about sleep training. I think when I had my first, there was a lot around sleep training and leaving him to cry. And you've mentioned previously about how the sleep industry can be quite dangerous with things such as the words self-settling and really what our expectation around normal sleep is. So can you just explain to me why you feel that the sleep industry can be quite dangerous?
Yeah, I think, again, coming back to the point that it's not a regulated industry is important to know as a parent, because if you're looking for a sleep coach to help you, you need to make sure that your values and the way you parent aligns with the coach that you're going with. I think the fact that it's dangerous is for a few reasons. I became a mum 10 years ago and thought sleep training was a rite of passage into parenting. And I remember doing it and hating it and getting upset myself and just thinking, well, this is what you have to do as a parent. And it wasn't until my second son arrived, and he was premature and has kind of various illnesses and things going on for him, that I started to think a little bit more. Obviously, I was more confident as a parent, and that obviously helped. The reason it's dangerous is because we're still pushing a narrative that we have to teach a child to self-soothe or self-settle, depending on kind of what those things mean for you. And the main issue is that we cannot teach self-settling and self-soothing, because that requires your prefrontal cortex to be fully developed, which doesn't happen until we're in our late 20s, early 30s. And it doesn't start to mature until we're about 4 or 5. All of the evidence and kind of research on this shows that it's not robust enough evidence to suggest that it's safe to do, or that it isn't, or that it is safe at all to do, if that makes sense. So we're kind of thinking about that and other aspects of our children's life, erring on the side of caution in that we actually don't know 100% if this is safe to do.
Yeah.
But what we do know is that child mental health and attachment and their ability to regulate comes from co-regulation and responding to our children when they're upset, even overnight, just like you would during the day.
Yeah.
But the difficulty is that, and I think my approach can be taken in the wrong way, in that people don't understand there is other ways. You don't have to leave your child to cry. And I think sometimes that can come across as we're saying, well, you just have to cope with the sleep deprivation then. And you don't. You know, if you're responding to your child every single hour, they're upset every single hour, let's look at why that's happening. Let's not put the blame on the parents. And that's another reason why it's dangerous, is that parents will internalise it and think that they're doing a bad job or they're failing, and they're not. What's failing us is our healthcare system that are not looking at the root cause as to why a child would be so unsettled and waking up every hour. And ultimately the answer is you just need to teach them that, you know, to sleep.
Yeah.
And we can't teach sleep. It's a biological function. You know, we are all capable of sleep. And we don't need to be aiming for this kind of perfect putting them down in their cot and waiting for them to close their eyes, because some babies will come out of the womb quite naturally doing that, but most will not.
Yeah.
And that's okay. You're not going to create any bad habits by helping them fall asleep.
Yeah. I think that's a really key point, isn't it? Is managing that expectation on what infant sleep should look like.
Yeah.
I think people do think by the time we reach sort of 6-8 weeks, we should be getting into a routine where we lay them in their bed and they do sleep for a certain amount of hours.
Yeah.
And I guess we buy into that because we are desperate for sleep and we are tired.
Yeah.
And then people have that message about the baby needs to learn to self-soothe. And it does make you feel like it's something as a mother that you're doing wrong, that you need to get your baby doing so that you can get that very much needed sleep.
Yeah.
So tell me, what exactly do you think is normal for infant sleep?
Well, what we do know about infant sleep is that when they come out of the womb, they do not have a body clock. They're not producing their own melatonin. They don't know the difference between day and night. All parents have control over at that time is making sure that they're fed, making sure that you're keeping things light and bright during the day, dark and quiet at night, to help them along their way.
Yeah.
And, you know, there's things out there that will say once your baby hits 10 pound in weight, they'll be able to sleep through the night. Well, some babies are born at 10 pounds in weight. And what's biologically normal, especially for the first 18 months of that child's life, especially if they're breastfed as well, is that they will wake to feed. The research shows that 80% of breastfed children will wake at least once or twice a night for a breastfeed up until 18 months. We know that sleep's linear. It can go up and down, and it can be affected by things like them learning new skills and their brains developing, all of those things, if they're in pain. The reality is that there isn't enough sleep education given to people like our doctors and, you know, in their training. So parents are going into this blindly. They don't know exactly what is happening to their child's brain and their development. And what they should be doing. There's such varying degrees of what is normal and abnormal. A baby waking every single hour or less than that consistently, we need to be looking at why that might be happening. But it is normal and biologically appropriate for children to wake a few times a night. And there'll be periods of time where that is more frequent and periods of time when that's less frequent. And we also need to consider that our children's sleep needs change an awful lot in those first 2 years. So as a newborn, they kind of need 18 to 20 hours of sleep in a 24-hour period. But by the time they're 2, that goes down to about 11, 12, 13 hours of sleep. Yeah. So sometimes problems that parents face come from the fact that they don't know that their child's sleep needs are changing, and they're trying to stick to this magical 7 p.m. till 7 a.m. routine. Well, okay, that's 12 hours of sleep. If they only need 12 hours in the day, when are they going to nap? So we need to be educating parents on how sleep works in general. Because it'll help their mental health. It'll help them feel like, you know, they're not failing, and help these children kind of do what they need to do to grow and develop without kind of being left to cry if the parents think that's the only way of achieving it.
Yeah. What's the damaging effects then of leaving your child to cry?
there's a lot of different research that is sleep training specific. Mm-hmm. So kind of splitting parents into control groups with children and trying different methods, for example. The outcomes of those studies rely on parental reporting, which isn't, we could argue isn't entirely accurate if we've not been keeping diaries. And the effects on attachment, again, are parental reported. So if they're not attachment experts and know how that works, then it's very hard to measure. And this is what I was saying about we don't know if it's safe or not to do. But what we do know is about how infant mental health and their attachment works. And we know that their mental health is optimal and their attachment is optimal when we co-regulate and respond to that child's needs. Mm-hmm. So we have to consider lots of different bits of kind of research about children when we're considering whether it is safe to do or not. Mm-hmm. We do know that babies, they communicate by crying. Mm-hmm. And if we ignore those cries overnight, potentially what's happening is that they just don't communicate because they have learned over a set period of time that cry isn't going to get a parent response. Mm-hmm. The studies that were done with actigraphies, so kind of machinery that tests when children will wake, although actigraphies, there are flaws in them as well, shows that those babies that were sleep trained still woke the same amount of times, they just didn't signal. So what we're essentially teaching that baby isn't self-settling, it's no one's coming right now, so you need to preserve your energy and go back to sleep. Yeah. And to hear that as a parent that has sleep trained or considered sleep training can feel, you could feel kind of guilt about that. I know I certainly did now that I know. And, I'm not coming from a place of judgment or saying that parents are awful for doing it. At the end of the day, we're told to do it. It's mainstream information. And what we do need, instead of kind of judging parents for wanting to or for trying it, is more information about it so they can make informed decisions and what else could be impacting on their child's sleep.
Absolutely. I'm with you on that. I did it with my first son. He had silent reflux and a milk allergy, and he cried and cried and cried a lot. And I was exhausted, absolutely broken with exhaustion, especially when it's your first child. Yeah. You've got no resilience to it and you just don't know what's happened to you. So at the time, even sort of 7-8 years ago, there was so much around sleep training, so much around leave them to cry for prolonged periods of time and he's going to learn to self-soothe. And it was coming at me from every direction. I sat with many, many sleep coaches and it never sat well with me. Even back then, I felt this horrible, overwhelming feeling of anxiety listening to my baby cry. Mm-hmm. But it's what the advice was. Mm-hmm. And I think you're so right. We do need more understanding on infant sleep and expectations of what realistic sleep is. And exactly as you say, sometimes looking for the reason behind why they're not sleeping. Yeah. So what would you say are some of the big common problems that people come to you for sleep? What are the main things that you feel you experience?
It's kind of two different camps of parents. Mm-hmm. So me specifically, I work with children that are waking up very regularly. For older children, that might look like they're experiencing night terrors, which is where your nervous system behaves abnormally, and they can thrash around and scream and shout. And for the younger babies that I work with, it's either parents come to me and say, my baby's waking up every hour and they have done for 6 months and I've exhausted all the options available to me and it's not getting any better. Mm-hmm. And I do not want to leave them to cry because clearly, in my gut, I feel like there's something wrong. Or I'll have parents that will come to me that will say, my baby's been diagnosed with reflux, they've been diagnosed with CMPA, cow's milk allergy, and sleep's not getting any better. Yeah. They're waking up every hour, even though we've eliminated the cow's milk. It's quite varied, but then my approach on how to help those families will remain the same regardless, which is why we need to be looking at things like feeding, especially with a child under 12 months. If they're waking very, very frequently, the first place we need to go is their feeding, because often that is what is causing.
Why is that? What is it about feeding?
So if a child has a poor latch at the breast or the bottle, It's very shallow. Their lips are pursed. They're kind of clicking. They're milk dribbling. They're constantly having to have like a bib or a muslin square under their chin when they're feeding. That baby is swallowing air.
Yeah.
And air intake is the most common cause of infant reflux.
Really?
Yes. And just at the moment, actually, I'm working with a 14-month-old little girl who is waking up for 3 hours every single night, and she screams for those 3 hours. She's constantly regurgitating and swallowing back down, very inconsistent nappies, very, very clearly in pain. She's been seen by multiple paediatricians, and the paediatrician in the most recent kind of appointment just said, I don't know where we go from here for this child. So parents reached out to me at a kind of a last-ditch, desperate attempt.
Yeah.
And I've reviewed her information and, you know, her feeding videos. And the first thing I spotted was that she had an incredibly shallow latch on her bottle. And because she's 14 months and was only having 2 of those bottles during the day, and she wasn't kind of associating them with relaxing, I suggested that we take those away if she's happy, and she was, and to cut dairy. And within 3 days, that baby's sleeping through the night.
Wow.
So feeding, it doesn't... there is obviously an air intake part of it. That's probably the most common thing that's disturbing sleep. And that often comes from things like oral dysfunction or birth tension, tongue tie. So it's then, okay, let's find out why that air swallowing is happening too. Let's optimise feeding and help you with any of the issues that are causing that. So it's sleep. I'm a sleep coach, but it's more like a well-being. You know, I always say to parents, if you're going to invest this time and money in working with me, I don't want you have to come back to me in 3 months' time or choose somebody else in 3 months' time, because the whole point of this is that we're identifying why this is happening.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's so many different things that we're looking at and that are contributing to it.
So from what you've said, what are some of the red flags then that parents could be on the lookout for if their baby is waking regularly and perhaps not feeding optimally?
So there are things that will happen kind of in the early days. That might be kind of a very strong neck from birth, a one-sided breast preference if they're breastfeeding, waking hourly, colicky or kind of been diagnosed with that term, or they're doing a lot more crying than they are not.
Yeah.
Those are then the babies that it kind of gets to around 4-6 months old and the waking becomes more prevalent. Those babies might be doing a bit of mouth breathing, so sleeping with their mouth open. They might always be congested. They may struggle with things like ear infections. For me, though, if your child is waking up every hour and has done for a long time, months, outside of kind of teething and illness and regressions and those things, we need to look at why that is. That to me is a red flag. And you know, it's not always. Sometimes it's just separation. That child's temperament means that they want to be close to their parent, and we suggest co-sleeping safely, and that helps. But yeah, things. You know, if you've had a baby that's had a very tricky birth, C-section, forceps, we hear the term torticollis a lot, which is kind of like a very tight neck on one side, which can then cause some flattening in the skull. Things like that you're looking out for that would be indicators that that child might be then struggling to feed effectively, and then that might be having a knock-on effect on their sleep.
So that's a term I feel we hear a lot, is colic, reflux and tongue tie. So can you just talk me through, because this is a big one for me, colic, what exactly does it mean?
So it comes from the Greek term that means colon.
Right.
And it was just a term given to babies that cried a lot and that were kind of had trapped wind or quite, you know, kind of grizzly and back arching, drawing their knees up. But it's kind of been turned into this diagnosis, and it's not. Nobody knows what colic is. It's just a term given to a baby that is grumpy and crying a lot. And the causes for colic you could argue are the same as the causes for reflux. And is colic just silent reflux? Yes, babies who are being overfed, for example, and are in some pain in other areas, it's dangerous that we're then saying they're just colicky without really, listening to that parent's instinct. Or you'll get told your baby's a purple crier, like they go purple when they cry because they're straining so much. It's dangerous to assume that it's normal and they'll grow out of it.
So colic is almost the symptom, isn't it? But
Colic
we're
is
giving it
always
as
the
a
symptom.
diagnosis.
Yes.
So
And that's
that
the danger.
we then don't deal or look into it any further.
Yeah, exactly.
When we need to see it as a symptom as to what's actually going on.
Yeah.
Interesting. And the same for reflux. Again, children seem to be coming through with so many more allergies now, cow's milk allergy in particular, causing reflux. Talk us through that. Talk us through what's going on there and how that affects sleep.
So this is my reflux is kind of the thing that I'm probably most passionate about kind of educating parents about, because again, reflux is a symptom. We can have symptom, GORD, for example. So gastroesophageal reflux disease. Disease kind of insinuates it's this thing that we get and we can't do anything about, we can't get rid of. Babies and children are only ever diagnosed with that if their symptoms are causing significant distress, which is, again, a strange concept to me. Like if an adult went to A&E and said, I am being sick after everything I eat, would they be told, it's fine, you'll grow out of it. It's just a bit of reflux. Here's some Gaviscon.
Yeah.
They wouldn't. Children aren't designed to be in pain, essentially. They're not. And if they are and they're consistently bringing up milk, a lot of parents are only really listened to if their child's losing weight, their failure to thrive, they're covered in eczema. Those are the parents that are listened to more. And other parents tend to just kind of say, oh, you've got a happy spitter or a happy vomiter.
Right.
But we really need to be looking at why that's happening. The biggest danger at the moment is that children are being given things like Gaviscon, which puts a really thick lining on the top of their stomach contents to make it harder to regurgitate. So it doesn't fix the reflux, it just puts a plaster over it. But then those children are going to be in more pain when they need to vomit because it's harder to get up.
Wow.
They're also going to be constipated because their stomach contents are really thick and jelly almost. Or they're given omeprazole, which is a PPI medication. So that stops our proton pumps in our stomach from producing acid to digest certain foods or all foods. It kind of limits or reduces acid in the stomach. The whole kind of point of omeprazole is so that it doesn't burn then when it comes up, so it's not causing them as much pain. And don't get me wrong, in some instances, omeprazole is needed to protect the esophagus while we find out what's going on. But what omeprazole long-term can do is mean that we can't absorb things like iron, vitamin C, magnesium as effectively. And there is evidence to show that proves that long-term omeprazole usage causes food allergies and intolerances, which is the second most common cause of reflux. Wow. So all we're doing, if we're leaving a baby or a child on omeprazole, is increasing their chances of becoming more refluxy as they get older because their stomach's going, hang on a minute, I have no idea how to digest this food, especially if they're put on it before 6 months of age and they're not weaning yet, and then all of a sudden they're introduced to their allergens and the gut doesn't know how to digest it.
Babies nowadays are recommended to be given vitamin D when they're born. How does that affect their sleep?
So there are two types of vitamin D. There's vitamin D1, which we get through our food or dietary supplements, and there's D3, which we get from the sun. So that absorbs through our skin when we're exposed to sunlight. Vitamin D is essential for our circadian rhythm, so our sleep and wake cycles, and it's essential for us to produce melatonin. Vitamin D deficiency has been linked to sleep disturbances and disorders like night terrors, sleepwalking. So it's massively important for sleep and our health. So yeah, it's recommended, and even formula-fed babies after the age of around 6 months, after the age of 12 months, if they've been on formula, a really good quality multivitamin that contains things like iron and vitamin D2 is massively important.
So you'd recommend that for all babies?
Definitely, yeah.
Finally, I just wanted to ask, do you have any thoughts or advice that you'd give to anybody on sleep? Any key things that you think every new parent needs to know about infant sleep?
So I would say the most things I get messaged about on Instagram is how to stop my child from waking up at 5 o'clock every morning.
Yeah. That was one of my ones.
Yeah. Or why is my baby only taking 20-minute, 30-minute, 40-minute naps?
Mm-hmm.
So if we start with the naps, it's biologically normal and appropriate and almost like a safe guarding measure for a baby to have short naps, especially between the ages of around 3 to even up to 8, 9 months sometimes. That's for a few reasons. It's because their nervous systems aren't fully developed yet.
Yeah.
So they don't see sleep during the day, especially on their own, as safe to do. Mm-hmm. They also, towards the younger age of that range, they need more sleep in a 24-hour period. So that means relieving sleep pressure little and often, which means having shorter naps. It's also a protective measure against things like SIDS. So if you're struggling with short naps, you're not on your own. And if you ask any parent, that has a baby of a similar age, they'll probably say that they're going through the same thing.
Yeah.
The best thing to do is to contact naps, so wear them in a carrier or a sling, or push them in the pram, or have them on you during a nap, and know you're not making a rod for your own back. You will get them in their cot at night.
Yeah.
We have to, again, it comes down to education, I think, and parents feel so much better when they learn that sleep doesn't work the same during the day. The only thing that makes us want to nap is sleep pressure, so tiredness.
Right. Yeah.
Whereas at night we have sleep pressure and our circadian rhythm and all that comes with that drives our sleep. So if you're really struggling with short naps, you can try and extend the time that they're awake to build that sleep pressure to see if that kind of triggers a longer nap. But it wouldn't be something I'd be worried about at all. And yes, it's annoying, but it won't be forever.
I think that's the thing, isn't it? We're all trying to fit our entire day into that nap.
Yes.
So when they wake up after 30 minutes and you've barely unloaded the dishwasher,
exactly,
you wonder what you're going to do for the rest of the day.
Yeah. And I think if you've got a baby that's over 9, 10 months and that's happening, definitely try and extend those wake windows, build that pressure for them to sleep.
Yeah.
And that kind of magical 1 hour, 1.5, 2 hour nap will happen at some point. And kind of then goes hand in hand with parents asking me about early rising. Most early rising comes from the fact that that child has simply had enough sleep in that 24-hour period. Right. So again, education on how much sleep your child needs is so important. And the way you can work that out is by keeping a sleep diary for a few days, note down the time they wake in the morning, any naps they're having, the sleep that they're having overnight, and tot it up. And then if they're having... You can use the National Sleep Foundation. They have a chart there, which is evidence-based sleep needs for kind of different age groups. So yeah, the most common cause of early rising is that they've simply had enough sleep. So then what we need to do is either be capping daytime sleep or making bedtime much later.
Okay.
It's also very common when they drop their nap as well, when they get to about 3 and they just don't want to nap anymore. And the reason for that is too much sleep pressure. Right. So sometimes if that's happening, bringing back a half an hour nap, making bedtime later and resetting their body clock a little bit before dropping that nap again can massively help.
Do some children just naturally wake early? Do they? You talk about people being larks or owls.
Yes, yeah, definitely. So there is, we're all born with a chronotype, and that's genetic, that gives us a preference for whether we are an early riser, like you said, a lark or an owl. If your child is a natural early riser, they always will have been. Yeah. They'll always have been kind of wide awake and full of beans kind of from being really tiny. Yeah. But if it's something that suddenly happened or has just happened over the kind of the last couple of weeks or whatever, then it's more often than not a change in sleep needs, and we just need to balance that out.
Right. Lovely. Well, look, thank you, Emily. It's been an absolute pleasure to discuss this with you. As I say, sleep is just such a huge topic, so much to process there about many different things, but I found that really useful and really interesting. So hopefully our listeners will as well.
Good, thank you.
Thank you for joining us.
No problem. Thank you.